for failing to call on her during Prime Minister's questions. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there's a strong proposal on the table for a ceasefire in Gaza. Earlier, 150 tonnes of UK aid was delivered to the region. Foreign states are to be banned from owning UK newspapers. It's after concerns over the takeover of the Telegraph titles by an investment fund, mostly owned by the United Arab Emirates. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 24 points at 77.72. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.16.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Rain continuing for central parts tonight, spreading southwest later. Drier elsewhere, showers easing in the north overnight with a low of 2. Heavy scattered showers moving in for Wales and Western England tomorrow. Brighter in the southeast with longer spells of rain further north. A high of 15. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale, here with you until 10 o'clock. It's Wednesday's Cross Question. We have a stellar panel for you tonight. We have, to my left, Tracy Crouch, Conservative MP for Chatham and Aylesford, but not for much longer because she's standing down. We'll ask her about that a bit later. She is, of course, former Sports Minister. Alistair Carmichael, Liberal Democrat MP for Orkney and Shetland. He's not standing down. He'll be there till Kingdom Come, won't you? He's the party's Home Affairs spokesperson. To my right, Camilla Turner, Chief Political Correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. And to her right, Matthew Stadlen, political commentator, who's the host of the podcast 20 Questions With, which Tracy and I have both appeared on. I think you've got to get Alistair on next.
And Camilla as well.
Yeah, we can act as a dating agency for you. Now, lots to talk about tonight. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to phone in, you can text 84850. You can WhatsApp us now on 0345 6060 973, and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's Sam in Leighton. Hi, Sam.
Hi Iain, and hi to the panel. My question is that we're in a time of anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic hate crime. I wanted to know why Hester's comment was not treated as a hate crime, and also as an extremist hate crime, and is £10 million the cost of a black woman's life.
Diane Abbott has now filed a complaint with the Metropolitan Police's Parliamentary Liaison and Investigations team over the comments of Frank Hester, the Conservative Party donor. Tracy Crouch, let's come to you first on this.
Well, given the fact that Diane's clearly filed a complaint, it's obviously now a live complaint, and I don't think it's probably wise to comment on the sort of kind of aspects of
I think we can comment on anything because nobody's been arrested.
But what I would say is that what he said was appalling, and, you just don't go out there and talk about people being, wanting to get people shot, particularly MPs as in the current climate as well, and, and I thought it was horrendous comments, and actually I think that he should have called Diane Abbott and apologised personally.
He says he did try twice, but she didn't pick up the phone.
Well, I hope he's writing a very large cheque to a charity of her choice as an apology, because I think it was just, his comments were outrageous.
But not outrageous enough for the Prime Minister to call them racist until he was forced to by Kemi Badenoch.
Well, that's up to the Prime Minister to explain why it took so long for them to...
But as a backbencher, do you not tear your hair out?
Yes.
When there is such
yes.
when there is such incompetence in Downing Street.
Yes.
I wasn't expecting such a clear answer there.
Yeah. Well, of course you do, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to see sort of kind of leadership, and Iain, you and I know each other because of our love for football and very many other things, and we go and watch our teams at the weekend, and we shout at the manager, whether we like it or not, about the decisions that they're making that impact the outcome of the game that we're watching, that we've got involved with. And sometimes it is like that, being a backbencher with the leadership, and you want them to come out and you want them to make good decisions very early on. And yesterday was a classic example. It doesn't happen just in the Conservative Party. This is just the latest example. It happens in all political parties over all sorts of different issues. You want a firm line to be taken really early on. And
but they didn't take a firm line on Lee Anderson. They should have learned from that, yet they've repeated the same mistake.
I think Lee was probably a slightly different example, but this was clearly racist, misogynistic and aggressive. I'm not quite sure what was difficult about saying that he should have apologised.
OK, Matt Stadlen.
I just think those comments, he's alleged to have said this major Tory donor, absolutely appalling. And people get confused. I mean, Diane Abbott herself has said offensive things in the past. That's why she was suspended from the Labour Party. But that doesn't in any way mean that we shouldn't all be jumping up and down calling out the appalling racism that she's experienced year after year after year, decade after decade.
Well, that was admirably concise.
Well, I'll go further.
Keep it up.
What I'll say, I'll echo what you said about the extraordinary fact that in dealing with the Lee Anderson comments, which are clearly Islamophobic as far as I was concerned, and now dealing with these comments, the Prime Minister's been dragged kicking and screaming to come to the right decision. In the case of Lee Anderson, I don't think he still has called those comments Islamophobic, and he gave him the opportunity to apologise, and then he would have been recalled, as it were, as a sitting Tory MP. You're left with no doubt that the reason that Sunak, in this case, has acted as he has is because, A, he doesn't want to give back that money, because 10 million quid or whatever it is a vast amount of money in an election year, and also, sadly, because he doesn't want to alienate racist voters.
I think a lot of people might take issue with that last comment, but I mean, he is a person from an ethnic minority himself. I can't really think it's in his head that he doesn't want to alienate racist people.
I don't see what other conclusion one can draw. I mean, I've given an alternative, but I think it's both, because I think he would himself probably have felt that Lee Anderson's comments were obviously Islamophobic, and the better part of Rishi Sunak would have condemned them as such. Why didn't he? Because he's desperately trying to keep on board some of those voters who want to go and vote for reform at the election.
What do you make of Kevin Hollinrick's comments? He's the business minister, saying today that, yes, if Mr Hester offered another 10 million, they'd happily take it.
But just completely bizarre. I suppose it's a logical conclusion. If they're not going to give back the 10 million, and why not take a bit more? The whole thing is not just deeply offensive to the majority of right-minded people in this country, but it just shows that number 10 and Rishi Sunak as our Prime Minister simply doesn't have a grip. People are desperate now, I think, to have a vote.
Camilla Turner, I'm presuming you were at the lobby meetings yesterday when the lobby spokesman wouldn't use the R word, and yet that as soon as Kemi Badenoch did, the Prime Minister did, therefore presumably undermining the credibility of the lobby spokesperson. It's a shambles, isn't it, in communications terms, let alone anything else?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. What this whole fiasco, which is still ongoing because it will run and run, is showing us, and it's very similar in some ways to the comms fiasco and strategy fiasco of the Lee Anderson situation, is that it's just an indication that Downing Street doesn't really have a grip on things. It's constantly changing its tune, it's changing its line, it's having to kind of be led by events rather than leading events itself. And that's not a position you want to be in. As the government, as Downing Street, you're the one that can set the tone and set the agenda, rather than feeling yourself under this avalanche and things are changing and moving around you and you're having to squirm and change your position multiple times during a day to get to somewhere where the common sense position would have been just to say that, call a spade 24 hours earlier or whatever it is. So I think what this really demonstrates is a Downing Street operation that doesn't massively have a grip on things.
That's often used as an excuse for sort of political parties being low in the polls. Oh, well, if you clear out the Downing Street team and get a new lot in, that would make it better. Now, there are experienced people in Downing Street. James Forsyth used to be political editor of The Spectator, but he's not on the comms side. He's political secretary, so therefore surely it's partly his job to sort of work out what the strategy should be. But then you've got a very inexperienced communications team there as well.
I'm sure there are plenty of sensible people in Downing Street. I think sometimes it's having the right comms strategy. Another part of it is failing to really read the room and see where people are at with things. You can see the kind of public discourse changing over the course of a day, and then you're wanting suddenly where you are is quite far from where the public is with things, and you think, oh, there's a gulf here, actually we need to bridge that gap. So I think it's reading the room, seeing what the kind of sentiment is and not quite having a grip on that, so having to catch up with that rather than being on the same plane to begin with.
Alistair, Carmichael, you've been in Parliament quite a long time. You've seen lots of different scandals come and go, some in your own party, it has to be said. Looking at this, what's different about this one?
I think the difference here, look, you've had a good analysis of the symptoms around the table already. The underlying problem here is that Rishi Sunak is a Prime Minister without authority in his own party. So everything gets overthought time after time after time. He is constantly looking over his shoulder at those people on the backbenches who are much farther to the right than him. He is an intelligent person. He's a decent person who, of course, we'd know that these comments were unacceptable. He knows that he should have called it racist, but then he's getting advice coming at him from all sides. And it's because he has that lack of authority and confidence in his own position that things go badly. So, I think we're absolutely right. We've come to a point now where actually not an awful lot is happening in government. You had a budget last week where there wasn't really much that was done because there wasn't really much that could be done. A general election is a moment when you can reset the dial, and I think that's where we've absolutely got to. I travelled home last week with a Conservative cabinet minister from John Major's cabinet, and he said, in 1997, we did exactly the same thing. We hung on until the very last minute, and as a consequence of that, it was worse for us than it would ever have been. Good advice, but, the problem is there's only one person who's going to make that decision, and when he's in the bunker and he's thinking about his own reputation and legacy and the rest of it.
How was Martin Rifkind?
It wasn't Martin Rifkind.
Just a wild guess. What do you think about the issue of returning the money, though? Because that's certainly been something that Labour have highlighted. You can understand why.
I think anybody who knows anything about modern politics will be able to tell you that ship has sailed. The money will be spent. It is gone. I think, though, what is more pertinent and more worrying was Kevin Hollenrake's comments this morning.
Which he has rowed back from it, hasn't he?
Well, yes, indeed. And I kind of think I felt a wee bit sorry for Kevin being sent out there. That was not... He went out to talk about the great work he's doing with post offices, and he is doing good work. And he ended up dealing with a thing that he wasn't really...
Pesky interviewers.
They're difficult. You know what they're like, Ian. They're not nice people.
It's the one thing I don't miss about being a minister is doing that morning media round when you're out there talking about some, sports governance or something.
If Rishi Sunak wants to close this down now, then he has to say, we're not going to take any more money from him. We took it in good faith. We didn't know the background. You can talk about repayment or not.
Let's just take a quick question from Phil in Archway. Phil, what would you like to know?
David Cameron awarded Frank Hester an OBE when he was Prime Minister. Should it be removed?
Well, of course, they did remove the CBE from Paula Venables, who was the former Post Office Chief Executive, and of course CBE outranks OBE. So one word answer, yes or no, should the OBE be taken away from Frank Hester? Matt?
Yes.
Camilla?
Yes.
Tracy?
See, I can't say yes or no because I find this a very dangerous path that we're starting to go on in terms of, you'll get given your gong. I have one, just saying. And,
What was that for?
Services to sport and to politics, as it happens. But I do feel that we are going down a bit of a dangerous channel if we start.
Why? Why is it dangerous? Because if somebody is proved to be a bad person, take it away from them.
It feels a bit salacious, the right word. It feels like people are not going to stop until it's gone.
I don't think anyone's, very few people are bad people. I think people can do bad things, and if they do something that's sufficiently bad, then they should have their gong taken away.
But the difference between I think Frank Hester and Paula Venables is that let's be clear, he shouldn't have said those comments. He has apologised for those comments, and I don't think Paula Venables ever sort of kind of
Well, she certainly
showed. Yeah, exactly. So I think there was a slight difference.
The test you have to apply is, would it make a difference? And I'm not honestly sure that it actually would make a difference, other than possibly that we might be a bit more careful about those to whom we give honours in the future. So, process, but probably yes.
Okay.
I'm a Lib Dem.
We will move on to other subjects in just a moment. You're listening to LBC. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Past 8 on Cross Question. Matt Stadlen is here, Camilla Turner from the Telegraph, Alistair Carmichael from the Lib Dems, and Tracy Crouch from the Conservatives. Now, Tracy, you announced that you were standing down from Parliament. A lot of people, particularly on social media, were almost distraught at this news. Why have you decided to go?
I just decided that it was time to try a new challenge. I've been an MP now for 14 years, predicted to hold Chatham and Aylesford, which would mean another 5 years. I turn 50 next year, and I just thought it was just time for...
No.
Thank you, Iain.
You don't look... You really...
No,
it's polite to say, but you don't.
It.
Oh, that's very kind of you. But I do. And also within that 5-year period, my son will transition from primary school into secondary school, and I just...
I wonder where you're going with that from.
And so I just decided to try new challenges. You know, it's a job that if you decide you don't like it after 2 years, you can't leave. Well, you can, but you upset a lot of people doing so. So I just decided to.
Is it partly because you've fallen out of love with the job?
No, I still love the job, and that is actually one of the challenges. It took me a long time to come to the conclusion. Having gone through breast cancer treatment, I came out the other side feeling very positive about life, and also but very realistic about how much time we have on this planet, and actually I just wanted to make sort of kind of new opportunities for me and for my family.
Have you decided how you're going to do that?
No, I've been getting some nice offers, which is...
Have you?
But I haven't actually decided anything, and there's no rush to do so.
Right, let's move on to another question. It is a text question from Danny in Birmingham. Why do Middle Eastern governments buying up establishment newspapers matter more than them buying up the rest of our cultural sphere, such as some of the country's biggest football clubs, and using them to paper over human rights abuses? Well, the government's media minister, Lord Parkinson, which Tracy and I were just having a little giggle about because he used to work for both of us, has confirmed this evening that the government will change the law to ban foreign governments from owning British newspapers. Meanwhile, Premier League champions Manchester City have been owned by a member of the UAE's royal family since 2008, while the Saudi Arabian State's Public Investment Fund controversially bought Newcastle United in 2021. Alistair, it does on the face of it look a bit odd. Why should newspapers be singled out like this?
Well, I don't think they should be. And when the Saudis were bidding to take over Newcastle United, and full disclosure, I know nothing and care less about football.
Shame
I know. And in this company, I can feel myself start to blush. But that's how it is. But I did say that I thought that they were not fit and proper, and that is to be the taste, fit and proper people. And I got the most incredible amount of hate mail and some quite serious threats, or some quite graphic threats at least. Whether they were serious or not, I'm not sure. So I think if your premise is that we should be treating all institutions the same, then I think you're right. But I think that means we should be applying higher standards to those who have bought football clubs than we have done, rather than lowering the standards of who can own a newspaper. And I think it does come down to this test. It's pretty facile to say, well, we shouldn't have foreigners owning our sports clubs or our newspapers. It's not a question of where they come from. The question is, are they fit and proper people? And I have serious concerns. And knowing what, somebody who cares about human rights, about having UAE ownership of the Daily Telegraph.
Now, Camilla Turner, it's been in a way surprising that many of your colleagues have felt quite free to talk about this in the media. And I think particularly female journalists on the Telegraph have been quite outspoken, given the human rights record in that part of the world. What's your view?
I think it's obviously a huge development today that the government has said it's going to write into law this ban of, they say, foreign ownership, influence or control by foreign states of British media organisations. And that's come after... it's essentially the government's attempt to see off a rebellion headed up by one of their own peers who had an amendment with cross-party support, over 100 MPs backing it, so that kind of backed the government into a corner to do something about this. And just to reflect on your point, I do think there's a difference between a foreign government owning a football club or another entity in the UK, sort of investment in any of our assets, versus ownership of a newspaper, because I think having the British state or any foreign state owning a newspaper, which is meant to, as a plank of democracy, it holds governments to account, our government, other governments around the world. And I think there's obviously a huge conflict of interest there if you've got one foreign nation state anywhere that actually owns that newspaper.
But the point goes beyond the ownership, and it is, for me, my starting point here is about the human rights record, and it's the message that you send to people in this country and other parts of the world. And it's not just about ownership here, it's about the fact that you get Formula One in Bahrain, for example.
Absolutely.
And you now see all these various different sporting events happening in Saudi Arabia. That's saying to the wider population, who maybe don't take the same depth of interest as we do in politics and have the same understanding and concern concerned about human rights, that actually these countries are all just the same as the rest of us. They're not. You know, if you don't maintain the standards of human rights in your own country, then you should be treated differently.
Matt?
Yeah, I just think foreign investment generally is really difficult. I mean, where do you stop and where do you start? Look at America, for example. I'm not anti-American, but lots of states in America have the death penalty. Look at what they've been doing to abortion law over there, which many of us feel very strongly about in this country. So, broadly speaking, it's quite a tricky area. I'm emphatically against us allowing Saudi Arabia to sports wash by buying one of our great football clubs, Newcastle United. Saudi Arabia effectively owns it because it's a Saudi investment fund, whatever they say. But I agree with you guys who've already spoken that there should be an even higher bar when it comes to things that can impact and affect our democracy. And clearly the Telegraph is a right-leaning paper. I've written for it myself. I don't agree with plenty that's in it, but it does have an important role in our society, and it does have an impact on our democracy, and it should not be owned by the UAE.
Would it matter if it was a private sector company from the UAE buying the Telegraph?
Yes, because the UAE is basically an autocratic monarchy and therefore will have a degree of control or influence over its private companies.
Tracy?
So I think there's really interesting points that everyone has made, and I have worked quite closely with the UAE, both as a minister, where I had quite a lot to do with the country in terms of cultural heritage issues, tourism. I've also worked very closely with the UAE organisation at Man City, and I've seen what they've done to develop Manchester, that part of Manchester, which has been incredible. Obviously, when I was chairing the football review, the issue of PIF takeover of Newcastle was a live issue, and I think Matthew's right in terms of it's very difficult when you start getting into issues around foreign investment, and also it's very difficult when you start looking at different countries and their human rights records. And by the way, I've been on foreign delegations where ministers from Scandinavia have had a go about UK human rights records. And so, you know, it's a really challenging issue. I think on balance, you know, the government's obviously considered this issue very seriously. It's taken a lot of advice on the matter.
They have followed Labour on it, really. Haven't they? Labour's set the tone. I mean, I support...
No, I think actually that there was a whole list of Conservative members of Parliament who've been very vocal.
That's different from the government, though.
But it's clearly influenced. I wouldn't say the government was influenced by what Labour said on this. I would say.
Well, where does this leave the Telegraph now? Because there are two other bidders, as I understand it. Paul Marshall, the Liberal Democrat supporting hedge fund
of yesteryear, yes. Of yesteryear, I think it's quite a while since he
classes
supported.
himself as a Liberal Democrat.
Does he indeed?
He does
All
indeed.
Right, that's interesting.
But he's a major shareholder.
Yeah, I'm really not sure he does. I mean, I think that Rubicon may have been crossed when he financed
he said it to someone very recently.
GB News.
And he's a major shareholder in GB News and funder of GB News. And then you've got the Daily Mail that are interested as well, and I can't see how that could happen on competition grounds. So what is the future of the Telegraph here? Because there doesn't seem to be an ideal buyer.
No, look, I think you're right about that. And again, the situation would have been so much better if this nettle had been grasped weeks or months ago. But look, we are where we are. If the government acts in the way that it says it's going to do, then that will be a problem for the current owners of the Daily Telegraph to solve. It is still a very successful newspaper. It's still the house journal of the centre-right politics in this country. And I would be astonished if there wasn't a buyer for it out there somewhere.
Well, we will no doubt soon find out. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. You're listening to LBC. Charlotte Morgan has the news headlines that's coming up to 8:30.
The House Speaker is being criticised for failing to call on Diane Abbott during today's Prime Minister's questions, following remarks made by a Tory donor. A spokesperson for Sir Lindsay Hoyle says there wasn't enough time. Foreign states are to be banned from owning UK newspapers. It's after concerns over the takeover of the Telegraph titles by an investment fund, mostly owned by the UAE. And 150 tonnes of UK aid has arrived in Gaza. It includes tents, bedding and blankets for thousands of people. LBC weather. Rain in central areas will spread southwest overnight. Showers easing in the north, a low of 2.
This is LBC.
At
.8:33, an LBC exclusive now. Alistair Carmichael cares even less about cricket than he does about football. Is that because, do you not play any form of cricket in Orkney and Shetland?
No, there are people who play cricket
for one day a year.
In Orkney. Well, you can play cricket right through 24 hours in the height of the summer. You know, we don't get dark in
Is that
summer
right?
state.
Well, at all?
You know,
Ever?
there's that little bit sort of between 12
Why are you looking at me like that?
Because I'm surprised you did not know that.
Well, I've never been
midnight
there.
and well.
Yeah. Also, isn't there a famous cricket match in Shetland that's played on the beach or something?
Not that I've ever been aware of, but you know.
Alistair Carmichael, finger on the pulse of his constituency.
Playing cricket on the beach.
Right, let me remind you, if you just tuned in, let me tell you who's on the panel. Camilla Turner from the Daily Telegraph, Matt Stadlen from the podcast 20 Questions with Alistair Carmichael, Liberal Democrat MP for Orkney and Shetland, and Tracy Crouch, Conservative MP for Chatham and Aylesford. Right, a text question from John in Somerset. After it was revealed by LBC that hundreds of homeless children have been arrested in recent years years. Isn't it time that the 200-year-old Vagrancy Act was properly updated? Now, just a bit of background on this. LBC and the charity Centrepoint have revealed that more than 620 people below the age of 26 have been detained by police across England over the past 5 years under the Vagrancy Act. The government is currently seeking to change the law to clamp down on what it calls nuisance begging via its criminal justice bill. Tracey, you have views on this, I gather.
I have very strong views on this. So I was part of a cross-party group of MPs that campaigned to scrap the Vagrancy Act. It is an outdated piece of legislation that effectively criminalises rough sleepers. And we won that argument, and government committed to scrapping the Vagrancy Act. In fact, we brought it in a piece of legislation in the last term. However, it was not commenced, so it hasn't actually begun. It's not been repealed, it's still there. In the process, the government has now tabled clauses to the Criminal Justice Act that criminalise nuisance begging and also what they define as nuisance rough sleeping. Some of the most appalling drafted clauses I've ever read. And I think anyone who has ever done anything relating to homelessness and particularly rough sleeping will know that the last thing that you need to do with somebody who is sleeping rough is put them in prison, which is what this piece of legislation is trying to do. So myself, the MP for Cities and Westminster, and led by Bob Blackman, the MP for Harrow, East, West, one of the Harrows, have put down an amendment which has attracted a lot of signatures across from all parties to actually remove these clauses. When you are talking about rough sleeping, you need to be thinking about a holistic approach to how you help people who sleep rough on the streets. Some of these, there's just real anomalies in this drafted legislation, like, if they are a nuisance rough sleeper, whatever that is, they will be handed a fine.
We won't know what nuisance begging is, though, don't we? Why would you want to see that removed?
Because actually there's legislation that already exists under, for example, the Antisocial Behaviour Act, where you can deal with this. You can strengthen it, you can improve it with guidance and everything else. You just don't need to put a nuisance beggar in prison, which is what this piece of legislation is going to do, especially as yesterday we were in the House. Alistair and I both spoke in the statement in the House yesterday, where people are saying, well, actually, we've got real pressure on the prison estate, and what we actually need to do is trying to manage prisoners in different ways. So criminalising people who find themselves in a really difficult situation, particularly rough sleeping, which isn't always, by the way, about housing supply. There's a difference between homelessness and rough sleeping. People quite often have addictions, they have mental health concerns and all sorts of things. Trying to give them a fine at the last known address for them or trying to put them in prison is not going to work.
Camilla?
It sounds like I remember doing a story on the government's proposed changes to this act. Must have been over a year ago, but I remember researching it, and this act it's so archaic. It kind of dates back to the Victorian times when begging was illegal and they'd throw beggars in jail. Obviously, in this day and age, that's not how we deal with the issue of rough sleeping. There are much better systems in place to try and rehabilitate people who are homeless and on the streets. And I think the problem with this act is that it's really outdated and it's essentially not really enforced anymore. It's just kind of there in word, but in practice, those kinds of ideas and concepts about how to deal with the issue of homelessness just don't really have a place in our society.
And who's been driving this? It sounds like a Suella Braverman initiative to me. Am I right?
I think it does stem from the tent comments.
She made those appalling comments about tents. Look, none of us want to see tents on the streets of London, but what we want is for the people who are living in those tents to get the help that they need. We certainly don't want them to be arrested or criminalised effectively for being alive. It's absolutely appalling, and I think most listeners will be shocked to hear this. I was listening to Andrew Marr on the way in, and he said this story makes him really upset. And I think it makes all decent people upset. My instinct when I see people sleeping rough, doesn't happen all the time, when it's really, really cold, if I've got a jumper on, and I'm sure lots of listeners will do this as well, I give them my jumper. The idea that the instinct would be to arrest someone is not just preposterous.
And you have some very nice thick jumpers, I remember.
Do you remember, do you?
Alistair.
Tracy can stick her fingers in her ears for the next 30 seconds or so. Because actually what you've just seen is why Parliament needs people like Tracy Crouch. Because there have to be people who can reach across the parties, identify an issue where you actually make progress and are able to work with others to bring change. And this is what you're seeing here. There are others who have been involved in this in different parties at the same time, but look, it takes a particular strength of character to take on your own party in government, and that's why you'll be missed, Tracy.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have people though, sort of coming up to you in the lobbies saying, "I would rather you didn't say these things"?
Not anymore.
No.
After 14 years of doing this.
They know better than that, surely. But look, to come back to the question about, first of all, children sleeping rough, in every other aspect of child and family law, the test that is applied is the best interests of the child. So why suddenly do we divert from that into this really unpleasant, quite visceral approach? Yes, I think it probably does have its roots in the Braverman years, but she's gone and so she did.
May I just quickly say that because this is an example of where MPs do good stuff, and I spend quite a bit of time on television or radio or social media criticising this government. It's also important to hold those in power to account. But there are loads and loads of MPs, not just from the Labour Party, which I broadly speaking support, who are in politics for absolutely the right reasons. And we know because of the pressure they get, the harassment, the abuse and the threats, that it's not an easy thing to do. And I have a lot of respect for people like you two who've actually put yourselves on the line in the way.
Enough of this loving, honestly.
But I think the thing is sometimes we do get criticised and people, quite often people say, well, aren't you a Tory? And you sit and think, well, actually, one of the people who advocated for the scrapping of the Vagrancy Act was William Wilberforce. He was completely against it 200 years ago. And sort of kind of, and you just sit there and think, oh, hang on a second.
Times change, though.
I know, but it's just
Right.
like, it's not a mean thing to want to care for somebody to get.
James says, Iain, why don't you ever say that the programme is available to watch on YouTube? Well, you're absolutely right, it is, but we'd love you to watch on Global Player as well. But if you want to watch on YouTube, you can go to the LBC YouTube channel. Right, a caller, Lou, is in Angus in the east of Scotland, it says here. Hello, Lou.
Hello.
Hi, what's your question?
My question is, why, considering Norway's the richest country in the world, did we not take a stake in oil and gas? And now we had a second chance with the wind industry, energy, and we failed to take another stake.
Alistair.
Absolutely right. To answer the first question, why did we not do it? Because we were too busy spending the money on other things, and you can only spend the money once. And now, all these years down the line, I think you can see the folly of that. My communities in both Orkney and Shetland actually did see the opportunity there. We did drive a hard bargain with the oil industry when they came to our communities, and we've got significant reserve fund now as a consequence. But the point is, going forward, there is an opportunity now to have a second bite at the cherry, because you've got licensing rounds for big offshore wind developments. There's one to the west of Orkney and one planned probably then to the east of Shetland, so you see this. But the licensing round, which could have brought in significant amounts of money for future generations, in the way that other countries have done. In fact, New York City, I think, or New York State rather, is the best example of this, where they've got billions for their communities, and we've got hundreds of millions, most of which has already been spent by the SNP and the Greens in Edinburgh.
Tracy?
Can I make a confession? I know nothing about energy policy. What I will say is that I very much would like to see more effort and energy on renewable sort resources. And, the question is, why aren't we taking a stake in wind energy? I don't know the precise answer to that question, but what I do want to see is more wind energy.
Onshore as well?
Actually, I've come to like onshore wind.
You?
I have, yes.
Wash your mouth out.
No, seriously. And actually, some of my constituency, as you know, in Kent, is becoming paved over with new housing. And if somebody had said to me, rather than housing, would you take a reservoir or would you take wind turbines? I would have taken both those things over housing.
Controversial. Camilla?
I would just say generally that I think one thing the war in Ukraine has really taught us is the importance of Britain having its own energy security and not being too overly exposed to energy on international markets, which can be incredibly volatile if there's an unexpected shock like a war. So I think any degree of that we're able to shore up our own energy supplies and invest accordingly, I think that would ultimately mean that households don't have to bear the brunt of massive changes in energy prices that may depend on global events.
Matt?
Yeah, I think energy security, energy independence is really important so that we can't so easily be held over the barrel of oil by a dodgy regime. One of my concerns is that we came up with net zero and it feels like we've been backpedaling a little bit to work out how we make sure that isn't implemented in a way that it doesn't hurt those on low incomes. And some voices from the right, including parties like Reform, have been making this case. Those are important arguments. They need to be taken seriously. At the same time, the Tories have rowed back a bit on the green agenda. I worry that Labour have also done that by abandoning their multi-billion-pound pledge. The future is so obviously green. There seems to me to be a lot of money in it, both for companies and for our society, our country. We have to have the courage of our convictions, but we have to do it in as equitable a way as possible.
This is a political decision. You know, the North Sea is the most expensive place in the world to take oil out of the ground, but still oil companies do it. We insist on a higher stand of labour rights and environmental standards than just about anywhere else in the world. The energy companies price that in. The sort of sovereign wealth fund of renewables that your caller was talking about would be priced in by those who were going to generate the electricity, and it would literally be money in the bank.
Right, we'll move on to some other subjects for the final 13 minutes of the programme in just a moment. It's 8:47.
LBC
51 on LBC. Tracy Crouch, Alistair, Carmichael, Camilla Turner and Matt Stadlen with us answering your questions. And here is one from Ulf in Hamburg. Ulf, willkommen.
Guten Abend, Ian. Good evening, panel. According to Ben Wallace, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, is the wrong man in the wrong job at the wrong time. Do you agree? I do.
Right. Give me your reasons as to why you agree.
If even a leading Green Party member, Mr. Hofreiter, complains about a lack of leadership, you really have a problem. Unfortunately, the only alternative, Mr. Merz, is even worse.
Mm-hmm. OK, well, it's between the devil and the deep blue sea in Germany. It's a bit like here in some ways. Matt?
Well, on Olaf Scholz, I'm going to try not to answer this too politically, but there are question marks about the extent to which he's stood up to Putin, I think it's fair to say. I would slightly mediate the question to ask whether Rishi Sunak is the right man in the right job at the right time.
You could be a politician.
I mean, timing is everything in politics, if you think about it. And I think Tony Blair was very lucky to be the right man in the right place at the right time, whereas Gordon Brown patently was not. Jim Callaghan had all the qualifications to be Prime Minister. He'd held the 3 great offices of state, but he was there at the wrong time. So luck and timing play an awfully big part in this,
To be fair, you could say that Starmer's lucky. I mean, assuming that he does win this election, as most people probably think he will, because there isn't a massive appetite for him. There's not a huge enthusiasm. People aren't going to be rushing to the polls to vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. But Tony Blair, who is much more charismatic than Starmer, he actually won fewer votes. Labour under Blair won fewer votes in 1997 than John Major did, leading that Tory party in 1992 when people expected Neil Kinnock to win.
Camilla?
I think there was a degree of timing to everything, but I do think that sort of underplays the importance of personality in all this. Yes, maybe Tony Blair was the right person at the right time, but he also was, as you said, incredibly charismatic, had a sort of rare gift as a politician to really carry the nation with him, and there was a huge amount of his own agency in that. If Gordon Brown was leader at that time, would he have done the same? I'm just not sure. I don't think he had the same level of charisma that Tony Blair had. But back to our caller, that was a slight diversion. I would just say that, this is a characterisation coming from Ben Wallace, former Defence Secretary, who really has been banging the drum ever since he left his cabinet role for more defence spending and, the West kind of stepping up.
Germany is contributing more than any other country. I mean, we like to think we are, but actually, in monetary terms, Germany is just behind the United States.
He was very quick, wasn't he, as well as we were, to rule out boots on the ground, which obviously...
Which Macron is now sort of talking about.
Well, he's been stirring the pot, Macron, and there was an argument I even read actually in the Telegraph that for strategic ambiguity, for the purposes of strategic ambiguity, both Britain and Germany should have been slower to slap down Macron on that.
Alistair?
Well, look, in terms of Olaf Scholz, I'm not sufficiently acquainted with German politics, but I think actually Ulf frames the question in the right way when saying, the alternative is even worse, because bluntly, one of the hard truths about politics is you don't have to be great, but you do have to be better than the alternative. And, I think that's where...
that's enough about Ed Davis.
Who, of course, is great. As you know, Ian,
yes, indeed.
I'll have no suggestion to the contrary. But, Starmer is benefiting from that. Others have in the past. At the end of the day, that's going to be the choice that the nation has. It may not be the most inspiring choice, but if people don't like it, then they get
better than Biden v Trump, isn't it?
Well, it is. Look, it's difficult to believe that a country the size of America can come up with two better than that. But politics is a funny old business.
Do you not think, though, that in the end, electorates get the politicians they deserve?
No.
You don't? Well, they've got you.
No, because that would be an implicit criticism of the electors, and I would never do that, Ian.
Well,
but I honestly don't blame the electors, but I do think that there are massive structural inadequacies in our political system. The lack of a properly representative, proportionate voting system creates all sorts of difficulties. It gives you a House of Commons which turns people off in the way that we've been talking about tonight. So I'm not going to blame the voters, but I think that if we're going to turn that perception around, then the first thing you have to do is get serious about political and constitutional reform.
So I would say, in terms of that latter point, that we do need, I think, more education around politics and what it means, and why it is important to get out there and vote and to pay attention to what people are saying in their manifestos and things like that. And I don't think we do that well enough. And actually, I do think one of the things that I do know, or I think I know about German politics, is that they have votes at 16 and 17 for their regional elections, and then they have votes for the national government at 18. And I think we can learn from that. I actually think that, we can start people on their political journey by giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote in local elections. And the reason why I think it's important in local elections is actually the local authority that runs most of the services that are relevant to 16 and 17-year-olds. And then, we can start engaging them early in the political process, in the political system, and hopefully that will kind of
breaking news, Scotland has votes at 16 for local authority and for Scottish Parliament elections. And, the world continues to turn into its axis. The sun rises, the sun sets. And you have younger people who get engaged earlier, and I think the political process does benefit as a consequence.
Right, let's go to our fun question. Ulf, thank you very much for that, by the way. Let's go to our fun question from Gwen in Shrewsbury. Or is it Shrewsbury? With TikTok possibly facing some kind of ban in the US later this year, which one social network would you miss the most if it disappeared? Not quite sure if that qualifies as a fun question, but Tracy?
Instagram.
Why?
Because I follow lots of accounts that have cats on them and food and...
You do a lot of Instagramming, don't you?
Not really. Well, I do some Instagram, but also, I'm as you know, I like my running, I like my cycling, I like adventure challenges and things like that. So I do spend a lot of time scrolling through things that I'd like to be doing, such as being out in the Lake District doing a trail run or something like that. It brings, me happiness.
See, you may say you're about to become 50. When you get to near 60, you won't want to do any of that sort of thing.
Of course I will.
I can assure you.
Of course I will.
Actually, you probably will. Alistair?
Well, I think miss would be something of an overstatement. But the one that I still get least aggravation from is Facebook. Because
and that's your criteria, isn't it?
Yes. I'm not going to pretend it's a high bar. But, this is my third career. I was born and brought up in Isle. I've lived in Glasgow, Aberdeenshire, Orkney. I've got friends across the country through politics. And actually, that still does allow me to stay in touch with them. And for somebody like me who's otherwise utterly hopeless at staying in touch with people, that's actually quite a useful tool. But would I miss it?